Okay, we are live. Welcome, everyone. This is one of our recent Blender Cookie live streams for quite a while. This is something that we used to do quite a bit. Tim from Concept Cookie does it a lot, and it's always a lot of fun. So today I have Chris Kuhn with us, who is one of the excellent instructors on Blender Cookie. He's been doing a lot of work for us recently, particularly in hard surface rigging, mechanical rigging, modeling, and is really kind of, showing everyone how it's really done. He's being fantastic and has a lot of really cool stuff coming up. So welcome, Chris. Chris, why don't you go ahead and start and tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do right now? How did you get started in Blender, etc.?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Actually, the first program I ever used was called Caligari TrueSpace. That's the one I downloaded about 5 or 6 years ago. And I had downloaded Blender as well, and I couldn't figure out how to get it basically how to do anything, how to rotate or move around or anything like that. So I kind of canceled it until I had seen a couple of tutorials, including the sci-fi modeling tutorial by Jonathan here, and I decided it might be worth opening it back up because apparently I had not figured it out. And I'm definitely glad I did because it's been pretty fun, pretty amazing stuff.
Nice. I know that you mentioned the sci-fi modeling course. That was quite a while ago. So is that one of the ways you got started in Blender, or what did you do with that one?
Yeah, it really was. And I started watching it. I never actually finished the entire course because every time you would show me something new, and I was like, oh wow, that is really cool. I should go try that. So yeah, I never quite made it to the end, but
nice.
Still very useful. Yeah.
Well, it's cool that that you were using the courses that way, particularly because that's always kind of the hope is that people will use it and then adapt it to their own things.
Absolutely.
Where did you get started in CG originally?
Really, I was just playing around one time. I think I was moving houses, so I pretty much had no vehicle, and I had a laptop and some stuff that I downloaded, and I was just kind of playing with it. I've done 2D art for a while, but this is definitely way cooler. A lot of different possibilities.
Nice. So now, am I right in thinking that you are full-time freelancing right now?
I am. No, I actually have a day job. I work in IT, doing some contract stuff. I'm here in Europe doing it, but I mean, I'm from Michigan originally. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. So I do Blender kind of when I have downtimes. It's kind of off and on type of deal.
So, now, where'd you say you're living?
I'm living in Germany. I'm living in southern Germany.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
So then, if you're in Germany, does that mean you're going to be coming to the conference this year? In October?
I may very well. We'll see how the schedule works out.
You should.
My job is I'll get like a bunch of time off, and then all of a sudden I won't get any time off for like a month, and then I'll be working for it. So we'll just see how that works out.
Yeah, I can understand that. No, the Blender conference is always a lot of fun, and for anyone that's listening, you should definitely check it out if you get the chance. It's in Amsterdam every single year towards it's I think almost always the last weekend in October, and it's basically in the last couple of years, there's been about 200, 250 people each time.
Yeah.
It's all in one building, and it's basically just 3 days of nothing but Blender.
Absolutely. I went to the one last year in Poland, in Gdansk, and the Blend Swap guy, Jack is his name, Jack Herman, he actually invited me to come up there, and it was just an amazing time.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, just it's so humbling because you have so many people, like, you might think you're good at something, and you just watch everybody so good at all this different stuff, and you're like, yeah, I should go back and learn some more things now. But
well, and it's crazy too because it's it's not a huge number of people. Like if you compare it to like SIGGRAPH or something like that, which is 20,000 people or 10,000 people, however many it is, 220, 250. It's not all that many. But what's really cool is at least in the last few years that I've gone. It's such a range of people. I mean, you've got everyone from like particle physicists to hobbyists doing, everything from artwork to development to engineering, anything and everything, all in Blender. And generally, it's just such a wide range of people that not only are you going to find people that are better than you in so many regards, but you're going to find people that are doing things so different than you would even think to use Blender for that it's a really fun experience.
Well, and you learn about things that aren't even Blender. Like I did that F-18 model a while ago, and this guy emailed me back and he's like, hey, I was an F-18 mechanic in the Marines. It's pretty awesome, but here's about 25 things you really just got wrong. and here's what you should do. And I was like, okay, cool. And then I did the tank rigging tutorial, and I got some guys who used to work on tanks in the Army, and he explained, how tanks steer and this and the other thing. So I just learned all this ancillary stuff that really has nothing to do with Blender, but it's so cool.
Yeah, well, that's kind of been one of the things that I found rather eye-opening just in Blender in the last few years. People a lot of times will talk about or like really focus on how Blender either needs to or is gaining adoption in like the film and game industry, but at the same time, like that's such a small niche when you really think about the use cases of just 3D in general, and particularly something that's as diverse as Blender. It's being used in
Sure.
so many different industries. Everything from aerospace engineering to molecular physics, or I'm getting out of my realm of the things that I'm comfortable
Oh
with.
yeah, yeah.
But
It
yeah,
sounds like a cool subject. Yeah.
well, there's so many. I mean, just through the people that we have on CG Cookie, we get tickets or support emails all the time from people that are using it for whatever, and hear from all kinds of different universities to research labs to engineering firms to architecture. I'm like, that's so cool, because suddenly you realize that game and film, it's
Yeah.
it's just one piece, one piece.
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
while before we get too much further along, I do want to remind everyone that we do have the questions app on the right side. So while you're watching, if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to put those in, and we'll try and have Chris answer any questions that you guys have. And it does look like some people may be having an issue with the invite system, so give me just a second. While I'm looking into the invites, Chris, would you want to give people a little bit of background, I guess, on what you do primarily day to day in Blender? I know that obviously anyone that's watched your courses or follows your work is going to know what you do, but this is going to go out
Yeah.
to the entire YouTube audience, and so we have a lot of people that may not be familiar with your work. So yeah, give people a quick rundown.
Okay, sure. Well, I started really with modeling and mostly hard surface. I did a lot of different vehicles and things like that. I have dabbled a little bit with organics, and really the problem with me doing organics is not that I don't understand the tools in Blender, but that I have a lack of artistic talent in that area. Whereas with vehicles, cars, aircraft, stuff like that, has always been a hobby for me way before I heard about Blender. And because you also have, tons of blueprints and other source material that you can use to work on it. So that was kind of how I got started. And I really think a big turning point for me was I was working on Blender for a while, and I couldn't figure out how to get some edges to be smooth and some edges to be sharp where I wanted them to for the longest time, because you'd subsurf something and then your curves or your lines wouldn't be sharp or whatever. And like once I figured that out, I just kind of started having a lot of fun doing a bunch of different vehicle models, things like that.
Now, so I mean, I know within your work you've done a lot of everything from realistic models, like the F-18 and such,
Yeah.
to completely sci-fi models like the one that we used on the live stream page.
Yeah.
Where do you mostly find the vehicle designs that you work with, and do you have a
Uh,
preference over sci-fi or fictional versus realistic? Or
Well, I think, I'm really a sci-fi geek myself, but I'm also aware that, you open it up to a broader audience if you do real stuff too. And that particular design that's on that page was, I actually commissioned that design from somebody on DeviantArt because I saw some of his other work, and I thought it was just really, really cool. I've come up with a few designs myself, and I've also worked with some other 2D artists to help me out as well. I have a couple actually uh, here, but I've had one done by David Raboy, I believe that's how you pronounce it. That
I
says,
think it's actually David.
is it
It took me the
Raboy?
longest time to figure that out.
Okay,
It's
I didn't want to get that
Revolt.
wrong, but
Yeah,
Raboy. Okay, all right, okay. I
David's work is
apologize.
amazing, and any
Yeah,
time that
absolutely.
you get the chance to work from David's work, such a
Sure,
pleasure.
absolutely. Um,
Um,
good.
Sorry, we have a little bit of confusion because since I failed on the live stream link, there we have technically two live streams going of sorts. There's the one
Oh,
that you and I, of course, are doing right now that is live, and then we have the second one from the original Hangout page that where it was supposed to be. And so Wes is going to hop on there and make sure that everyone knows that we're in this one over here. Um,
okay, cool.
So, but no worries, we can go ahead and keep going because again, this is going to all be recording. So if you're coming in late and you missed the beginning of this, just be sure to check back on the YouTube page because the whole thing will be recorded. It'll post it there, and you can watch, catch up anytime. And of course, if you also miss the beginning and you don't get a chance to ask your questions or get your questions answered, go ahead and post it as a question on the YouTube video after this, if you're watching the recording, and we'll do our best to get your questions answered there as well. So real quick, I'm going to go ahead and put you on the spot, Chris, and we had a recent tutorial from Dan Brown on Blender Cookie that was just fantastic on modeling the hard surface panels. I think you might have even seen it. So what I would like you to have you do, if you're willing, is go ahead and share your screen on Blender, and I would love to see how you would tackle a similar issue. So, for example, using a curved slope, add in a sci-fi panel, do it just any way that you would normally do it, just for the sake of comparison, because obviously in the work that you do, with everything from your vehicles like the F-18 and the sci-fi jets and such, hard surface panels are something that you do a lot, and it's actually, sometimes it seems like a simple thing, but really I know a lot of people struggle with it, and it's something that we get asked a lot. So let's see how you would approach that.
Absolutely. I mean, I did for the longest time. It was very difficult. I just picked this one really fast. This is that Star Theory model that I made not that long ago. And if you could,
try to avoid rotating the view too much, just so that it doesn't blur too much because of the slightly slower connection.
Alright, let me zoom in here. So this is one of those things where it actually was very difficult for me for a long time to get panel lines and stuff exactly where I wanted them. So let's see, it doesn't matter, like if you're not trying to make a particular vehicle and you can just kind of make panels however you'd like, what I'll typically do is just take an object like this sphere right here. That is the wrong, there we go. And then I will join this, okay. And add an edge split modifier to that. And then I'll just come in here and pick a point, like for example this, and I would just bevel this tiny little amount like that. And then I just run a loop cut around here, and scale or alt scale, I mean just regular scale would work in this case, and then you just rip that with the V key, and then after you do that, you can just pick portions of it, that aren't the entire sphere. We'll do another one here maybe. Scale that and rip that as well, and you can continue on this process.
Now what's the purpose of ripping it? It's just to get your normals correct?
I know, just so that the second loop you run, like this line right here, only goes down a portion of the sphere, rather than the entire.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
Yeah, and then you can just continue to subdivide down like that. And actually, I think for this technique that I'm doing, the stuff that Dan was talking about would work perfectly, and probably better than what I'm doing, actually. The only time that I think you might run into a little bit of a problem is, like with this vehicle right here, you have some very odd or panels where the angle doesn't really determine whether there's a cut or not. In other words, you have to manually say, okay, even though this is a very smooth surface, there's still a cut here because, that's just how the vehicle is designed or whatever. And so you'll notice that what I've done is all the edges in here are actually marked sharp.
That's a lot of panels.
So I'll start with an edge split. It really is, but again, with this particular vehicle, it's awesome because it's all duplicated. So basically, you do one upper surface and then it's copied, 8 or 12 times or something like that. And the engines are the same way, so it's not quite as much work as it looks like.
Nice. Now, real quick, I'm going to take a chance to give you a couple of questions from the audience here. So we've got 3 of them at the moment, so I'm just going to go right down the list. The first one is, was Blender, I think you actually answered this in the beginning, but we can go ahead and hit on it again. And the question is, was Blender your first choice, or did you try other software?
Yeah, my very first 3D software that I used, I cannot remember the name of it. It was a very simple little application, probably a lot like Google SketchUp now, except it was maybe 5 to 10 years ago, and I can't remember it. The first one that I actually did anything significant with was called Caligari TrueSpace, if anyone's heard of that or familiar with it. Yeah, and that was something you could get free as well. I had a trial version of Lightwave that I played with, and then I had used Blender, and then I kind of put it aside because it was too difficult and I couldn't figure it out. And basically, I opened it up and it looked like this, and I couldn't figure out how to make it do anything other than that because I didn't have the emulate 3D button mouse, and I'm like, what is this? This is like a grid with a circle in the middle of it.
What version of Blender did you start on?
2.49 actually.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I've just recently started opening up, because if you open up a Blender file from 2.49, it'll be in your latest version, but the screens will still be split in ways that don't make sense anymore, and things like that. So I've started converting some of the old ones. But in doing so, I'm realizing like how bad some of my older models were. I mean, even the ones that
I prefer not to look through my archive.
Yeah. Well, and the worst ones, like some of them look okay until you tab into edit mode and you're like, oh my gosh, that's like 5 times as many polygons as it needs to be right there. That is just not efficient. But
that's something that I'm always very impressed with in your work, by the way, is how optimized your models are. Particularly, when you look at your models, like the hard surface ones, just looking at the surface, it seems like you'd have an incredibly dense mesh, with all the panel lines and things like that. But you do a great job of just using precisely what you need and nothing more, and that's what's really cool to see.
That's actually, here, let me talk about that really quick, because you'll notice if you're looking at my screen up here, I'm using Blender 2.64, which is kind of an older version of Blender right now. And this is the one that I actually always model in, because if we start with like a plane right here, the bevel tool here was actually not so great at beveling in this particular version of Blender, but it was very good at other things. So if we start with just a panel like that, you can bevel it and you'll have proportional beveling. So you do this a few times, and then you just delete a couple of extra loop cuts here, and you can end up with an effect that's very, very similar to subsurfing, but only exactly where you want it at, instead of just overall throughout the whole model. And the downside of that bevel tool is that it's not so great at beveling. Like if you wanted this cube, for example, to be beveled, and then you took this edge right here. Now, you try to bevel this edge in Blender 2.64, you can see that's not really optimal because it's trying to split the distance between here and here.
Right.
I definitely don't want it to do, but it is very good for smoothing things out and sort of adding that subsurf effect.
Now, just as a quick reminder, when you're beveling things and whatnot, if you can avoid moving the view just so it doesn't blur too much, that'd be great. Oh, that's great. Okay, yeah. Just so that it doesn't get too blurry for people that are watching.
Okay.
Now, we've got a couple of really good questions in here. One comes from David Campbell, who asks, what did it take to get your foot in the door, so to speak, professionally? And was it just a matter of practicing until you reached the level you were happy with and just throwing yourself out there, or did you have a specific goal?
Well, I mean, let's see. The most honest answer is I think I was lucky in that BlendSwap had just kind of gotten rolling a little bit before I was really doing it. So I kind of got to get in on the ground floor because if I go to BlendSwap now, there's so many amazing models, whereas back in the day there weren't as many. So I think the people that were doing it more kind of got more notice or more attention. So like if I were to submit and get started doing it now, I don't know that anything would have happened with me necessarily, just because there's so many awesome people doing it.
So, so it seems like BlendSwap was really key in your professional success. So what was it that BlendSwap allowed you to do? Was it exposure? Was it people seeing your work?
Oh, yeah. Or? It was definitely exposure, and taking requests and learning too, because every now and then I would see something that was just amazing, and I would chase the guy down and be like, "How did you do that thing? Tell me, please." And so definitely that, and let's see, what else? I got started with, I also saw like models on TurboSquid and a couple other sites like that, and I'd get some feedback from those guys. Sometimes they're like, hey, that's really good, but why don't you try doing this or that, next time. So it's just a really supportive community in general.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, so do you do a lot of freelance work anymore, or is it mostly just kind of small projects on the side?
I do. I do some freelance work. What I try to do now, though, is I really like doing the tutorial stuff. I'm enjoying that quite a bit. And then maybe sometimes, but the thing is, if I'm doing a commission for somebody, it may be fun or it may be cool, but it's kind of going to be like a one-time payment, for example, and generally you can't reuse that model. So it has to be something really cool or whatever Whereas if I do something on blend swap, it's kind of more fun because I can do things that you can't sell, or things that kind of everybody can use.
Sure, that's cool. We'll go ahead and go through a couple of the other questions here we've got.
Yeah.
The top voted one at the moment, which is you've kind of answered it already through some of your demos, but it's a really common one, and that is, what is the best way to avoid ugly creases in hard surface modeling? And this comes from Cody Winchester.
Okay. If we can specify, are we talking about when we do subsurfing, or how do you?
Yeah, I would imagine, being ugly creases tend to pop up the most when you're doing subsurface modeling.
Yeah.
So if you were using subsurf, what are some techniques that you would use to avoid ugly creases?
One thing I do if I have to use subsurf is I tend to apply it first and then do it. Let's see if I can.
Really?
Yeah, like I don't know. It's gonna be fun now. Let's just screw this up, but we'll do maybe just a very simple, like aircraft wing or something like that. Okay. So I'm trying to rotate this as little as possible, but let's see.
I love watching other people model.
Yeah. This gets bigger. There we go. All right. So just some kind of general spin type thing. I might subsurf this and then just run some loop cuts on it. Obviously, if I was actually building something, we'd put a little bit more work into the shape there, but that's generally it. So at this point, if you try to, let's say that you wanted a raised panel or something in the middle of this. Now, obviously, if you just extrude that up, you get sort of just this blob right here. And then if you come in here and you try to run edge loops to the very edge of your panels and you subsurf it, well, it's a little bit more definition there, but of course your whole wing now has these, of course now it's hard to see, but yeah, there's sort of, I don't know if you can see here.
It's a little hard to see in the stream, but perhaps I can describe it. Just haven't done it. Basically, when you do this, now you can see it in the stream. But basically, you're going to get pinching within the wing, and so where Chris previously had the really nice smooth edge, you're now going to have these kind of like bumps along it where those edge loops are joined together.
Yeah, maybe from this angle right here, you can see how it kind of comes down and is a little bit sharper. But basically, yeah, you end up distorting that anytime that you want to cut it. So rather than doing that, there we go. Whereas if you just apply the subdivision surfacing first, then you could take this and extrude it out, and you wouldn't have that effect, especially with a pitch split modifier. There you go. Then you have a nice, easy effect right there.
Maybe you could zoom in on that piece and then let it sit for a second so that the image will clear up for everyone. Yeah, that works really well. Now, so as a kind of a follow-up question to that, one of the great things about subdivision surfaces and just modifiers in general is their non-destructive ability. So if you're working on a really high resolution mesh, how do you handle that in the same way and just work on a higher mesh, or what do you do?
No, I mean, I generally will just add the subsurfing, work on the shape, and then once I have the shape the way I want it, I can go in and do the panel cuts and other things like that. And of course, I always save. I save ridiculous amounts of copies pretty much every time I do something, because you never know when either it's going to crash or more likely I'm just going to screw it up too badly and have to start over.
Sounds like you would be somebody that would benefit greatly from a version control system for meshes.
Yes, definitely. I mean,
I actually bring that up because John Denning, who is the guy that has been working with us, with myself and Patrick Moore on contours and polystrips, wrote a version control mesh system, and it's never been implemented directly into Blender or anything, but there's talks of it. So I think something that, just as a side note, I really enjoy watching you work because you and I work very similar, but also very differently in that I use subsurface so heavily. I mean, like, basically I use it on everything that I do, probably to the point that it becomes a problem, but it's just the way that I work. So it's cool watching you work and see such an optimized model that still looks really good even without the need for subsurface.
What's interesting is I look at like that sci-fi vehicle that you ended up doing for that course. And yeah, I mean, it did have a lot of subsurf in it, but you also had a much better understanding of the topology itself early on, and like what vertices needed to be joined, and like what edge loops were going to become important, or what rings of faces were going to become important. And that's something that I wasn't particularly great at, is just sort of seeing down the road how it was going to end up needing to be. And I think with subsurf that really does come out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it's almost a necessity with subsurface.
Yeah.
That's, I guess, one of the advantages to, to not using it as much like you do is that you have a little bit more freedom with the topology when you're doing hard surface models. Whereas when you're doing hard surface with subsurface, it's far less forgiving.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, let's go ahead and pop on to one of the next questions, which we have from.
Yeah.
I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong, but it's Regis Tef or Thef.
Okay.
And his question is, what modeling tools would you like to see in future versions of Blender?
Well, the number one thing I'd like to see is with the bevel tool, I just like to have an option so you could have both the old version and the new one. So you could do kind of that subsurf-like operation while at the same time retaining the actual beveling in case you want to really bevel things.
And so basically the differences between the two is if you have a tall cylinder and you bevel a loop down here, the current version or the new version will bevel equally distanced within the edge itself, whereas the old version would bevel proportionally through the connected edges. Is that correct? So such that like if you bevel an edge right here, your bottom edge is just going to go down a little bit, but the new top edge would go way up. Is that correct?
Yeah, here, actually I can do this really quick because I have both versions of Blender installed here. So I'll just go with, I'm just make a cylinder really fast with 12 sides to it. And let's have proportional editing still on. Okay, so in the older version of Blender here, you might not want to do this with an actual cylinder, but with some sort of curved part. But maybe you had this at 12 or 16 sides or whatever, and then later on in the modeling process you decided, man, I didn't use enough sides, but I've already gone and really put a lot of detail into this thing, and I don't want to redo it. You could say bevel and then 0.25, and you have, double the amount of sides now with, without distorting the actual shape. And what I'm going to do now actually is go ahead and get out of here. And 1 second. I'll open up. There we go. So now in Blender 2.69, which is a newer version of Blender, and if I were to do something similar, it's 16 sides here. And I'll just take a couple of these because it works the same. When I hit W bevel and I hit 0.25 again, you can see we have kind of a mess right here. It totally doesn't do the same thing at all. So it's much better to use the other object that we were using before. But anyway, it's much better at actually beveling. As you can see, it just works perfectly for the actual bevel, but not as well for smoothing things out.
Sure. Now, Tony has a question that's kind of follow-up to that real quick, which is, he says, doesn't the old bevel do it correctly if you apply the scale first?
And I understand exactly what he's saying there. And actually, no, it still works the same way, although you will, yes, get a much better, well, here, we can, I can actually show you that. We can even do it in here. So if I have a mesh like this, cube, and I just scale this up quite a bit on the z-axis, now I come in here and try to bevel that, you can see you're getting kind of a weird look when you bevel it. But when you apply the scale first, then when you bevel it, you'll get, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Yeah, now it'll work perfectly. And that's true in both versions of Blender, both versions of the bevel tool. It's just a matter of, do they bevel in relation to the edge that you've selected or in relation to the edges on either side of it?
Well, so really what it sounds like is that we should get you in contact with the rest of the modeling module team so that we can work on the bevel model, work on the bevel tool a bit, because it's definitely one of those things that, very few people understand the code base behind it, and there's a couple of us are working on basically the usability, but you're one of the few modelers that really uses it a lot, and so that kind of feedback would be really, really good. Yeah, that's fantastic, actually. I hadn't even realized that was an issue. Nice.
Okay. It's different, yeah.
So a couple of questions here. This one comes from Lamont Robinson, and it's Uh, how do you make extra panels actually look important to the design and not just random extrusions?
Not just random. Oh, well, that's more of an artistic question.
Yeah, it really is. It's a really good one too, though.
Yeah, it is. Important to the design. Well, one thing I like to do if I was doing this is to try to make sure, let's see, try to never cut things in line with each other is one thing. So, for example, if I had this panel here, uh, okay, and then I wrote this, I wouldn't ever do panels that lined up perfectly. Like I wouldn't have a panel that was cut here and then another panel that was cut here. I'd make sure to offset everything a little bit. And actually,
Now,
if you look, go ahead.
now for those people that are, perhaps newer to design and whatnot, what
Yeah.
is the purpose of the offset?
Oh, the purpose of the offset is because I think the offset looks good. There's really no other purpose to it.
Sure, I
But,
mean, it's more of
oh
a
yeah,
visual thing to add different interest.
yeah. But I'm saying so. I would. One second. Yeah, and I just think that like by cutting it up here a little bit off, then it looks a little better. But there are very few real panels on anything. I mean, even if you look at a ship or particularly like a fighter aircraft has lots of panels on it, but none of them are perfect polygons. They all have strange curve cuts in them and angles to them. And so when you create a mesh that's really, it's pretty easy for people to tell, I think, when you've really just taken the faces and cut them directly, because you'll have just things with four sides to them, and very few real vehicles actually have that, I think.
Sure.
They're very complex.
So a couple of our other questions here that I think are pretty relevant. One that from Mason Menzies that I'll go ahead and answer. And he's just asking, I'm saying that I'm kind of new to Blender and asking, so who exactly is Chris Kuhn? So if you're just joining us or if you didn't catch the beginning of it, number one, remember this will be recorded so you can watch the entire thing on YouTube if you wish. But Chris Kuhn is a fantastic hard surface modeler who has been doing a lot of training here on Blender Cookie recently. He did several different courses, particularly on hard surface modeling and mechanical rigging, which included things like rigging a complete fighter jet for all the different transformations, such as putting down the flaps and putting in the landing gear and all that kind of things. Did some really good courses on rigging an entire vehicle with automatic ground detection so that the suspension just worked. And then he's also working on some really cool hard surface modeling content that I'm not going to tell anything about just yet, but it'll be coming up in the next couple of months, and I think will be really fantastic. And if hard surface modeling is your thing, particularly like if you like the introduction of hard surface modeling, or if you watch the post-apocalyptic modeling course, then this ought to be a really, really good complement to those, and particularly cool because so I was the instructor for a couple of the previous hard surface modeling courses that we've done, and it's really cool seeing the stuff from Chris because he has very different techniques and workflows than I do, and so we get to see more insight into different workflows and such, which can be a really, really good learning experience because we all work a little bit differently. No matter if we're doing the exact same model, the way that we get to that model is going to be very different between, from artist to artist, and so it's always really nice seeing different people's approaches. I'm always amazed by that. Just with Kent Trammell and I, so we work together every single day for CG Cookie, and watching his workflow is really cool because it's so different than mine. And then I'm seeing the same thing with Chris's. So like I review all of Chris here, all of his tutorials that he submits to Blender Cookie, and so every time that he does something, I have so many wow, that's cool moments because he will approach something so completely different than I will, and you just kind of get this idea in your head that, oh, this is the way that it should be done, or this is the way that I do it. And so then when you see somebody approach it very differently, it's really, really cool. It can be a great learning experience.
I agree, and one of the things I do, it can be either a benefit or not, is like with a vehicle, there's usually certain parts of the vehicle I know exactly in my mind what they need to look like. So I may go a little too far detailing those without quite figuring out, how the shape of the rest of the parts are going to kind of work into that. And so I think, like, if you watch me model something, you'll see that, like, I'll do a little too much work maybe on one part, and then kind of need to go back and backtrack and figure out the rest of it.
Yeah, I do that.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, let's go ahead and jump through a couple of these other questions that we've got. And For anyone, if you don't get your question answered or if we don't get to it, feel free to ask it on the YouTube page later after the video has been posted for the recording. We'll try and go back and answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And additionally, if you have a question that you really want answered that isn't getting answered yet, note that in the questions app here on the right side of the page, you can also vote questions up or down. So I see that most people are voting on the questions, and so the more votes a question gets, the more likely it will get answered. Now, we should be able to get through all of the questions that we get, but just in case that we don't, there you go. So the next question that we have is from Bila Zabo. It says, how did you learn to design ships? Did you do some courses?
Well, I think there's only a few ships, to be honest, that I've really designed myself. And one was, in fact, I think I have it. I don't really have it. It was on Blender Cookie a while ago. It was called Hyperspace Shuttle, I think is what I called it. And that one I designed kind of by accident because I was just playing with some circles, and then it kind of started looking like a ship. And it was one of, if you try to build a ship 5 times, one time it'll end up looking decent. And that was the one time it ended up looking decent.
Nice.
But for the most part, if you look at the stuff I've done, I'll start by drawing it sometimes, or I'll talk with other people that do more 2D art, and just there's very little. I don't think there's such a thing as a truly original sci-fi ship anymore these days. I mean, even if you don't realize that you're being inspired by something that you saw somewhere, it's so.
Everything is inspired by something or another.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just as kind of a follow-up to Bila's question, my apologies if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Do you consider yourself more of a modeler or a designer?
Oh, I'm definitely more of a modeler.
So you prefer to work from existing concepts as opposed to create your own?
Absolutely, and I mean, I'm not bad at it, but when I see some of the people that are really good at it, then you can say, okay, yeah, I mean, I can do it, sure, but like David Revois, the Hammer Shark. In fact, let me pull that one up. I really like his design there.
If you ever get the chance, watch David Revois work live. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's really awesome.
Oh, I have, yeah.
Well, since you actually took the course, and for anyone that's listening, if you remember the hard surface sci-fi vehicle course that's on Blender Cookie, that was mine from a couple of years ago that Chris actually mentioned earlier, David Revois did the concept art for that, and he actually did it live at the Blender conference dinner in 2012, I think, over the course of just like 45 minutes for the initial design, and it was awesome. It was the first piece of artwork, or the second piece of artwork, I think, that he did for us, and it was really cool just because he's sitting there at a table just sketching on his laptop, and we had probably had a crowd of, I don't know, 20 or 30 people just standing around just watching him work, completely enthralled, because he's absolutely a master of his craft, and watching him draw something is just, it's awesome. It's really awesome. It also was one of those defining moments when I realized, oh yeah, I'm not a sketch artist. Most definitely not.
No. I mean, I'm trying to find, dang it, let's see, model sheets. Well, here's one thing, just a second, that, nope. Okay. So, I mean, here's a render of the vehicle that I built from one of these things, and then the actual model sheet that he provided was here. And this is the way that he does it is really awesome, because like he'll do some rough concept art, and then he'll build kind of a very low poly model in Blender, and then he'll just do a render of that and just paint over it.
Which yields just some of the most awesome modeling sheets because they're really accurate to itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And because with a vehicle like this, where you have a lot of different complex pieces that sort of interlock, and I didn't realize how good this was until I started modeling it, because it would be very easy for something to look wrong on the front view or the side view, that wouldn't quite line up. But as I modeled it, it absolutely does. Like, everything just works. And
I think that's actually one of the things that I really like about David's work in particular is, I mean, one, it's cool that he's also a Blender artist, but he knows enough about 3D and does enough 3D that he knows pretty much exactly what somebody needs in a modeling sheet, And so you end
Yeah,
up with really, really nice sheets that are great to work from.
absolutely.
Another question that we've got, the next one that's voted up, is from John Montgomery, and he was wondering, what are the benefits for using constrained empties rather than constrained armatures for rigging?
Ah,
Because this is something that, for
sure.
people that don't know or that are just now tuning in, Chris Kuhn here has done a couple of rigging courses now for Blender Cookie. There's some citizen ones and there's some free ones. And one of the things that he does a lot is he uses empties rather than armatures for the mechanical rigging. So I'll pass it
Sure.
back over to Chris now to answer some of the benefits as to why.
Yeah. Well, the easiest benefit that I can think to say is that it's easier or it's simpler. In other words, armatures are very much more powerful to use. They're also a bit more complex to use, and it's more difficult to duplicate them. Like I have this. This is one of the vehicles that I did for one of the CG Cookie tutorials. This F nothing. It's actually a fictional plane, but like when I'm setting up these, let's see, this was the pitch, yeah. So these flaps that move up and down here, you can just take, basically all that's happening here is this empty right here is just, has a lock track constraint and it's pointing at this one. So every time this one moves up and down, that particular piece, I believe that is just called the flap or elevator, I could be wrong, but that works. And you can just take those two empties and duplicate those and parent anything else to that, and that would continue to work the same way. So it's just really, really easy. And as Jonathan's mentioned, I think on the site, it doesn't work for any time where you need to distort the mesh. But if you don't need to distort the mesh, it's a really quick and easy way to get that kind of stuff done.
It also works. I mean, just as a side note, this is something that Chris talks a lot about in the courses. Um, it works particularly well with like a hard surface model like this, where you have a lot of individual pieces that you can actually
Yeah,
separate and give
absolutely.
their own origin point. So like on the flaps there that Chris was just moving up and down, the origin point will also define kind of the rotation pivot for the object. And so by separating all of your pieces out to be their own distinct elements, makes it
Yeah.
really, really fast to use the empties.
Well, and actually that's another reason is because like the origin point of this panel is actually just right in the middle of the panel. It's not on the hinge where it rotates, but because that panel is parented to this,
Mm.
um, yeah, then that's how it ends up doing. And that's really why I end up using empties instead of just putting constraints on the objects themselves, because I like to be able to, take that whole setup and use it elsewhere, or just kind of visually see the axis where things are going to rotate on.
Nice, and I guess I should also mention that just for anyone that's like we were talking about earlier with modeling techniques and whatnot, there's never only a single way to do something.
Oh
So
no,
like
no,
using the empties is really fantastic. But alluding back to the question, they're not necessarily better than armatures,
no.
nor are armatures better than empties necessarily. It's very much a use case while also an artist case. Like Chris and myself, the empties work really, really well as kind of a preference. Somebody that does a lot more armature work may prefer to use armatures. So they both work really well, and it's going to be more of an issue of what works for you and what do you enjoy doing, because both of them will absolutely work. Although there is one, I guess, distinct case where the empties definitely wouldn't work that Chris already mentioned, is that any kind of case where you need the rig to deform the model, such as like an
Yeah.
organic model, like if you need to bend an arm or anything like that, they won't work. That's where you
Well,
need to use an armature.
I was also thinking, maybe you had like a robot that was doing a walk cycle or something like that. Now, I mean, there's technically you're not going to distort any meshes because it's all a robot, still have hard pieces, but you'd really probably want to use um, poses with that. You know what I mean? To set that up, you wouldn't want to have to. It would get too complex if you didn't have the poses
Yeah,
available. And so
animating
yeah,
a
technically it would work, but it would be a dumb thing to do, I
right,
think.
animating a walk cycle with empties just sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah. So anytime there's a complex sequence that needs to be repeated, not perfectly, the next time around, yeah.
Yeah, definitely an armature in that case would be ideal. Now, another question from Mason Menzies, who, by the way, Mason is fantastic. Just a shout out to him. Actually got the
Hmm.
opportunity to meet him in Vancouver just a couple of weeks ago at SIGGRAPH. Mason, you're doing cool work. But he asked, I'm interested in learning hard surface modeling. What are the best courses and tutorials that you took that helped? Thanks.
Okay. Well, again, I'm going to have to go back and say that So it's an older one now that Jonathan did on modeling the sci-fi vehicle.
It's
I
really
thought,
old
no,
now.
it is really old, but the thing is, you actually spent a lot of time on that one. I think, what was it, like 15 hours or something like that?
I think it was over 20. It was,
Over 20 hours, right.
as
But
the
like,
instructor, it was obnoxiously long.
I'm sure it was. But see, that's the thing with that particular course is, if I watch it now, maybe it gets a little boring just because it's going so slow. But I know when I was starting, you couldn't go too slow. And I'm like, thank you for like taking the time to explain how things don't always rotate at the same point because I didn't know that, and all this little stuff that's in there is so valuable because it's just the stuff that people tend to gloss over when they're explaining things. So for that reason, I'd say it's still very good.
Cool. Well, it still thrills me to this day that you learned from that course and that was still helpful to you.
Well, because I'd see other people doing stuff that was really, really cool, and I'd see a bunch of keystrokes fly by, and then the thing would look awesome, and I'm like, what did you just do there? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny because that was actually one of the main inspirations for that course was because I was
uh,
watching a bunch of hard surface modeling courses from unnamed sources
yeah,
that had just these incredible results, and it's like that is
yeah,
just a gorgeous vehicle, or that is a gorgeous model. And then I would watch the course, and it was like, you know, 4 or 5 hours long, so it was, plenty of length, and I didn't learn anything,
yeah,
not a
yeah,
thing through the entire course. And this would, and at this point I was pretty comfortable modeling, and so I was more learning it to see their workflows, and it still was, I'm, sad to say, like they felt worthless. Like
yeah.
I just spent money on this. Like, why is this course so gorgeous and not good? So
No,
it's good to hear that that course actually came out good then. Well,
yeah.
let's see. Our next question then is from Levi, and he asks, do you consider important the knowledge of drawing to a 3D modeler or 3D artist in general? And how can it help to do this professionally?
Oh, well, I mean, obviously, if you're going to make your own designs, it definitely does help. Um, let's see. I guess it all depends what you're going to be doing. If you're making your own stuff, then sure. And if you're just trying to reproduce other people's stuff, I'd say the most helpful thing would be, like if you're going to do an aircraft model, if you can go find an airplane somewhere and take some pictures and just look at it or whatever, that is probably the best thing I would think. But again, it's such a
Yeah,
broad.
I would also agree with that completely. You know, the really like as far as the question goes, is drawing important or is it beneficial? Absolutely. But nothing beats real world reference of whatever it is you're creating, being that like we're talking about jets and things like that. Yeah, if you can get the photos, that's just fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was trying to find a drawing like this is a very, very crappy. I mean, I've got some, just things I've sketched in notebooks or whatever. But one of the great things about Blender is you can do just very, very rough pencil sketches on whatever piece of paper you got available, and you can scan it in and work from it. And then, of course, your circles are going to be perfect, and your lines are going to be straight,
Hmm.
and you can just fix all that stuff that you couldn't quite get, when you were just scribbling it out.
Anymore,
So, I
I
mean,
actually find that I sketch with the grease pencil more than I do on paper because then
oh,
it's just
really?
already in my 3D view and I can just quickly sketch out like a quick profile shape and
Yeah.
then I'll kind of use that as a base for modeling.
Okay, that's cool.
Our next question is from Lamont Robinson. It says, how do you know if a model's vertex count is optimal or not? Is there a vertex
Uh,
limit that applies to all models, or is it just a model that doesn't cause the program to lag? By the way, this is
well,
actually a question that we get a lot, and
yeah,
this is particularly relevant to anyone that's doing any kind of game art. So go ahead,
yeah.
Chris.
Well, that's a great question. And I mean, for this model right here, you can see our vertex count is 54,000 for this aircraft. And, is that too high or too low? That depends 100% on what this model is for. So if you're building a game, this is probably too high for any kind of mobile game, I would think. But of course, things are always getting better. Whereas if you have Um, I think in the Battlestar Galactica show, the ship that they had on that show was something like 2 million polygons or something like that, because they had a render farm and they had hours and days to render it. So then that was fine. It just kind of depends on what the application is. And
Yeah,
as
and I
far as
think I will follow up that question just a little bit with two last
sure,
points. Number one being if it's a game model, Yeah, it absolutely matters what the poly count is because you need to optimize in basically any way and every way that you can. As
Yeah.
far as is there a specific limit? No, because it depends
No.
entirely on the hardware and your engine and tons of factors. But the other one is if you're rendering any more with modern engines, poly count actually matters far less than textures. So
Yeah.
if you're having a hard time, say like improving your render time or something like that, look at your textures and look at your shaders, because just as an example, in Cycles has very, very good geometry handling, and rendering an identical scene so far as like shaders and materials are concerned with 1,000,000 polys and 10 million polys will have very, very little difference, particularly if those polygons are instanced. But the shaders and the textures and things like that will have a dramatic impact on, well, that and
Absolutely.
the lights, dramatic impact on the speed. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, totally
Okay.
agree. Yeah.
Another good one for you, Chris, is what kind of tools, such as the knife, B surfaces, etc., do you use the most while modeling?
Well, it really depends on the model. I mean, when I'm using the older version of Blender, I probably use the bevel tool a whole lot to get the shapes. There are other times where I do use the knife tool. One thing that I do a lot that I haven't really seen people or too many other people do would be to do that. One second here. Is if you had a shape like this, you wanted maybe a circular cutout at the base of this. I mean, you can do boolean operations, or you can do, what is it called? Shrink wrap. You can do a number of things, but sometimes it seems like the best results come from just taking a circle like this and lining it up here, and then you can just come in here and use your knife tool to cut a shape out of it, just following the shape that's behind it as well.
Do you ever use the knife project tool?
The knife project tool.
It's new.
Um,
It's new in. It was either 269 or 270.
well then I'm just recently ignorant. No, I
Check it
can't
out.
say
It's
that I
kind of
have.
cool. Basically, it allows you to do exactly that, except
Okay.
that you can use the circle as the knife.
Yeah.
So it'll basically like project a selected mesh onto your active mesh and cut directly
Mm,
through it. Um,
okay.
it's a
Okay.
little funky, I think. Oh, it's a mesh tool. So I think you have to. I think you select your circle and then select the cylinder and then go into edit mode and then do knife project or something.
Yeah.
It's really cool though. Yeah,
Okay.
actually the shrink wrap mode with projection is something that I use a lot.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. But yeah, I'll definitely have to check that out. I wasn't aware of that. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure which version it was. It was a little tool that Campbell added in. I think it was 270, but it might have been 269.
Okay. Yeah. I think the closest I've ever done is just this shrink wrap where I push it against it. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I use that a
definitely.
lot. I use
Okay.
that on um, I did a kind of a written tutorial on modeling a revolver, a handgun, and
Yeah.
I had not realized until I did that how freaking difficult the revolver drum is because of all
Yeah.
the cut insets into it, while it's also still like perfectly circular.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the most challenging things I've ever modeled, but
Yeah.
great fun.
For sure. I've never tried to do that actually, but I was wondering if you could do to take like a half of, or a quarter of a sphere and then extrude it out and then sort of rotate all those parts around a circle or something. I don't know.
Uh,
That'd be fun.
Yeah, you could. The thing that I found challenging, and it varies, based on the design of the drum and whatnot.
Mhm.
But basically, with the one that I was doing, I wanted the perfectly circular
Yeah.
diameter while then having the insets cut in. And so,
Yeah.
just say arraying or instancing the half of it or the quarter of a sphere wouldn't actually work because then the surface for the spheres would be flat where I want that perfectly round. So that's where it became challenging.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll try and pull up a link for you later. It's a cool
No,
one.
no, I think I get it. Yeah, that does sound fun.
Um, let's see, we've just got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to try and get
Okay.
through a couple of these last questions,
Sure.
and then we'll have to close out. So just as a final reminder, if you're just joining us or if you didn't see the end, this whole thing will be recorded on YouTube. You'll be able to find it. You can just watch the recording. You can go ahead and ask questions there just as comments. And while obviously at that point we won't be able to answer any questions live, we can still do our best to come back and answer any follow-up questions that you have. So the first last question that we've got, or not the last question, we'll just do 3 more questions and then we'll have to close out. So the first one is from Adam Earl, and he asks, could you explain the action constraint, child of constraint, and the rigid body constraint? Now, just for the sake of time, let's just do one of those. And I would say the action constraint is at least something that I personally find the most confusing. So would you want to give that one a shot, Chris?
I would, except that I find it confusing as well.
The action constraint.
I've played with it, but I don't know that at this point I'm comfortable with
Sure.
explaining it to you.
I mean, I can answer some of it. I cannot tell people how to use it, but I can tell people what it's supposed to do. Somebody like Bjorn Leonard or Nathan Vagdahl would be able to answer it very eloquently because it's something they use all the time. But basically, the action constraint, similar to like the or as an example, the transformation constraint Chris uses all the time, and it basically allows you to drive a movement via another movement. So, for example, if you wanted your cylinder to rotate this way when you move your cube this way, you could do that. So you could have this cube's movement along the x-axis drive the rotation of this object's, y rotation or whatever. The action constraint is very similar in that you can have the movement of one object drive the animation of another object. So you animate your object, and then you have the movement of your other object drive the progression of that animation. So as this object moves, this animation will play through. Totally confusing. That probably didn't make any sense, but that's at least how it sort of maybe is supposed to work. Experiment with it. It's really cool. It's very powerful, but it's confusing.
Yeah, it sounds like something to play more with, but yeah.
Yeah, so then we've got 2 more questions that we're able to answer before we have to close out because we're running out of time, unfortunately. One of them is a very broad question, but it's good. And what is the best way to model a sports car?
Oh, wow.
Very broad.
That is a very broad question. I mean, I've done it, but I think the way I do it probably isn't ideal because, interestingly, I'd say sports cars are really coming closer to organic modeling than they are to hard surface modeling.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
Yeah, even though, yes, it's in real life a car has hard surfaces and it's very mechanical, it's, a very smooth shape with edges that blend together. So, I mean, I would start with a cube and I would just put loop cuts in and push things around, but I don't have like a really good, quick way to explain it,
I mean, one thing that makes sports cars particularly challenging is that they're incredibly unforgiving. Every single little divot and dent in your mesh is going to show because, sports cars are just, the epitome of these smooth, flowing surfaces that
like the new cars. Like I did a Plymouth Duster, which was not that hard because, some of the older cars have very straight lines or very sharp curves, and it was like, metalworking technology or whatever it was back in the day, it was more forgiving, I think, to model an older car. Whereas with a new car, you just got curves on all 3 axes simultaneously, and cutouts that have to be precise so they won't line up with something at the other end of the car, and you're just like, wow, it's crazy.
Okay, I'll just add one last note just from my own personal experience modeling sports cars, and that is just plan on spending 10 times the amount of time that it takes to actually model it in just tweaking. And literally, I mean, going in, like, select a vertex, move it, shift your lines.
It's got to be a horrible thing to do a tutorial on because you're like, man,
I've done it. It's awful.
Yeah.
All right, so
what do now is just play with this until it's right. So
yeah, no, seriously, that's pretty much what you have to do. I did the post-apocalyptic modeling truck course. And that one was very forgiving because we intentionally went in and like damaged it and things like that. The sports car ones, like I originally was doing one a long time ago that then we stopped the course after a bit because it started taking too long and it was outdated, and it's still something I want to revisit with like a nice sports car and whatnot.
Actually,
but it really is. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, well actually that's interesting. That car that I just had up earlier from David Ravois. One of the things I asked him for when I was designing it is I'm like, give me something that's really, really hard because I want to do it and I want it to be like a challenge for me. Like I want to learn by doing it. So he deliberately made it with all these crazy little cuts and pieces that had to go together, and it
Nice.
just it's kind of a practice.
Nice, nice. All right, well, we have one last question. This is going to be
Okay.
pretty quick and short, and it's actually one of the first questions that we got in, so my apologies for taking so long to get to this one. But this is from Nicholas Carl, and it's a perfect Blender question.
All right.
Do you select with right or left click?
It depends what it is. Let's see. I mean, what's funny is I think
Good answer.
that's funny because I don't even know anymore. Honestly, I mean now it's obvious that it's the right click because I have the cube right here and I just do it without thinking. But if you would have asked me that and we've been having lunch or something, it would have taken me a minute
Yeah.
to figure out the answer to that.
Well, that's one of the issues that we actually have in Blender that we're working on solving is the key map selection is all over the place. Blender has right-click select by default, but that's
Yeah.
not really true. If you look at the outliner is left-click select, the node editor is left-click select,
Yeah.
all material, everything else basically is left-click, and so those things need to be made consistent, which is happening, by the way, for anyone else listening. That is being completely revisited, reworked, and improved. It's just a very time-consuming and tedious process. All right, so we've got to go ahead and close up now. We're sitting right at almost an hour, so thanks again for everyone that's watching. Again, if you join towards the end, don't worry. This whole thing has been recorded. It'll be published automatically on YouTube here very soon. If you have a question that you didn't get answered, I see that we've got quite a few that unfortunately we weren't able to get to. Do feel free to go ahead and repost the question in the comments on YouTube, and
Absolutely.
we'll do our best to.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it, Chris.
No, as I said, I'll go ahead and I'll go through that and see what I can answer on YouTube as well.
Fantastic. Chris is awesome. Yeah, so Chris is going to try and go through and answer some of those questions. If you'll post them in the comments on YouTube, I can also try and answer some as well. So again, thanks everyone for watching. My guest today was Chris Kuhn, who is one of our instructors on Blender Cookie and is also a hard surface modeler and mechanical rigging artist. He's absolutely fantastic. Check out his courses on Blender Cookie. Check out his work on BlendSwap. And overall, yeah, check him out. He's doing awesome stuff. Thanks again for watching, everyone.
All right, thank you.